Yo. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another Iceberg by yours truly. Today, I've decided that it's about time I jump into the strange and interesting world of lost media. There have been quite a few interesting icebergs made on the topic of lost media here on YouTube, usually covering the more popular mysteries or stories that have come up over the years, or just being a general, non-genre exclusive type of iceberg. But personally, I find when discussing lost media, I like to really comb in the stuff that I'm especially passionate about. And if it hasn't been made perfectly clear by now, I'm pretty passionate about the horror genre, regardless of it being video games, movies, stories, etc. And so today, I'd like to take you on a journey into the world of lost horror media. We'll be taking a look at lost films, TV shows, video games, and various other odds and ends, all horror related. And as always, I'll be including a few bonus entries along the way. I want to be sure to shout out the Lost Media Wiki and its community, as I'll be quoting information on basically almost all these entries from there a fair bit. And also, a big shout out to this iceberg's creator, Eric Thing, who not only made this iceberg, but a lot of other ones. Over 200 other ones, in fact. Has there ever been a more prolific iceberg creator? I don't know, but Eric Thing is certainly a champ nonetheless. So, with that being said, sit back, relax, and grab something hot to drink as we dive into the world of lost horror media. London After Midnight. London After Midnight is a 1927 silent horror film written by Tod Browning, the same man behind the 1931 Dracula and the 1932 film Freaks, starring Lon Chaney, who was regarded as one of the most versatile and powerful actors of cinema, renowned for his characterizations of tortured, often grotesque and afflicted characters, and for his groundbreaking artistry with makeup. In fact, his makeup effects he developed earned him the nickname of the Man of a Thousand Faces, and his most well-known roles were that of Quasimodo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame and the Phantom in The Phantom of the Opera, all of which were silent films, and thus Chaney had to emote and express these characters through facial and body movement, and not through his voice. Anyway, London After Midnight was an adaptation of The Hypnotist, written by Browning, and was one of the last major films to star Lon Chaney before his death on August 26th of 1930, sadly just as films with sound started to become a new norm. However, this film is sadly lost. According to the Lost Media Wiki, this film's plot was about, quote, Sir Roger Belfour, the head of a luxurious mansion, is found dead alongside a note. Professor Edward Burke, Lon Chaney's character, is placed in charge of investigating the incident. Sir James Hamlin, Belfour's neighbor, was the last to see him alive. Naturally, Burke questions him and Belfour's butler, Williams. Burke's questioning leads him to suspect Arthur Hibbs, Hamlin's nephew. 5 years later, the mansion has become dilapidated and is now a subject of ill omen. The mansion is now occupied by an eccentric old man who goes by the name of Roger Belfour and a ghostly woman renting from Hamlin. Professor Burke is once again drawn to the house to investigate stories of vampires residing within. Unbeknownst to others, the man is actually Burke in disguise, with the use of hypnosis and a fake setup of vampires. vampires. Burke tricks Hamlin into revealing that he was the one who murdered Sir Roger Belfort 5 years before, unquote. The film came out at the time to moderate success, with some critics at the time thinking it had an uninteresting plot, but that basically Chaney carried the film. And indeed, his makeup design and the design of Professor Edward Burke is quite iconic and striking, and actually would go on to influence future Dracula depictions, as well as monsters like that of the Babadook from the film, the Babadook. However, sadly this film has been lost for some time, as the only known copy was in possession of the MGM studio. However, it was likely destroyed in an explosion when on August 11th of 1965, the concrete roof of the building of MGM Lot 1 collapsed in the ensuing fire. Though details on this are a little sketchy, and while it is believed no one was hurt in this explosion, no estimate of the loss was available either. Regardless, this means that the last known copy of the film was destroyed, and while it's possible that another copy might exist out there, it's sadly unlikely, making this one of the most iconic and famous pieces of lost media, let alone lost horror media, and is often considered the holy grail as far as these classic horror films that people want to see resurface goes. The Golem. The Golem is a German silent horror film released in 1915 that was written, directed by, and starring Paul Wegener and Henrik Galen. It followed the tale of a fossilized human-sized monster made out of clay in Prague, who once protected the Jewish people from any persecutors, based on the concept of the Golem, an anthropomorphic being in Jewish folklore, which is created entirely from inanimate matter, usually clay or mud. Golems could serve many purposes and could symbolize a great many things, though this film would have been mostly based off the tales of Judah Lo ben Biziel, who was a rabbi, Talmudic scholar, a Jewish mystic, mathematician, and astronomer, as well as a philosopher, who, for most of his life, served as a leading rabbi in the cities of Mikolov in Moravia and Prague in Bohemia. Judah had reportedly created a golem out of clay from the banks of the Vltava River and brought it to life through rituals and Hebrew incantations to defend the Prague ghetto from anti-Semitic attacks and pogroms. A pogrom being a violent riot incited with the aim of massacring or expelling an ethnic or religious group, in case you didn't know. At any rate, in this film, the golem is brought back to life and used as a servant, but after falling in unrequited love with a woman, it goes on a murderous rampage, not unlike that of Frankenstein's monster and quite a few 20s and 30s horror film villains actually. But again, this was released in 1915, predating them all. Sadly, it was lost soon after its release, the film reels just seemingly not having been taken very good care of at that time. However, in 2007, some footage from the first act and a couple minutes from the fourth act were recovered, and in 2017, the Film Museum München completed a reconstruction of the film, incorporating newly discovered footage from the second reel of the film's American release. Additionally, several other reels are believed to exist and are owned by some European film collectors, who don't seem to want to share it with the world, which is pretty cringe to say the least. The Golem and the Dancing Girl. And while we're on the topic, The Golem and the Dancing Girl is a German silent film from 1917 that parodies the previous 1915 horror film, once again written, co-directed by, and starring Paul Wegener. I should note that there was actually a third Golem film too in the 1920s, The Golem, How He Came Into the World, though that one is completely intact and you can go watch it now if you wish. It's considered a great example of German expressionism, along the likes of Nosferatu and The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. German expressionism being an artistic movement in the early 20th century that emphasized the artist's inner emotions rather than attempting to replicate reality. If oftentimes outright rejecting cinematic realism, and used visual distortions and hyper-expressive performances to reflect inner conflicts, and is what we in the now would call a real gothy good vibe overall. Anyway, sadly though, the Golem and the Dancing Girl is completely lost to this day, with no footage or anything besides this poster and still photograph, and the cast list being any proof that it ever existed at all, though it is believed that a reel may be out there somewhere, awaiting to be uncovered. The Cat Creeps. According to the Lost Media Wiki, quote, "The Cat Creeps is a pre-code Hollywood crime/mystery film released by Universal in 1930. The film was a talkie remake of Universal's 1927 silent film, The Cat and the Canary, and was shot both in English and Spanish," unquote. Now, something of note is that term pre-code, referring to pre-code Hollywood, that being an era in the American film industry that occurred between the widespread adoption of sound and film in the late 1920s and the enforcement of the Motion Picture Production Code censorship guidelines, popularly known as the Hays Code, in 1934. The Hays Code was a set of industry guidelines for the self-censorship of content that was applied to most motion pictures released by major studios in the United States from 1934 to 1968, set in motion by Will H. Hays, president of the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, or the MPPDA, from 1922 to 1945. I don't gotta go into all the details, but basically that means a pre-code film was more likely to have sexual innuendos, romantic and sexual relationships, mild profanity, illegal drug use, promiscuous acts, prostitution, infidelity, abortion, intense violence, and homosexuality. Nefarious characters were seen to profit from their deeds, in some cases without significant repercussions. Basically, you were allowed to tell whatever story you wanted, and then when the Hays Code came in, you suddenly were censored and needed to be very careful about the story you wanted to tell. At any rate, the Cat Creeps plot is described as, quote, "revolves around 6 relatives of a deceased elderly man who declared that his will not be read until 20 years after he has died. Then, when the clock strikes midnight, and it has been exactly 20 years after his death, the will be read. The will states that if the heir were to die or lose their sanity, then the content mentioned in the paper will be given to another relative. After the will is read, the lawyer reading said will is killed. Annabelle, the heir to the old man's belongings, almost goes insane while staying in the old man's house due to the many frightening things it beholds," unquote. The film is mostly lost, with the only remaining remnants of it being the soundtrack and a few clips from it that were used in the 1932 comedy film Boo, which made fun of this movie and various other horror films at the time. All-American Massacre. All-American Massacre is an indie film that was an unofficial spin-off to Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1 and 2, starring fan favorite Chop Top.
"You're my fave. Me and Bubba, my little brother, we listen to you every night. Music is my life."
Bill Moseley reprises his role as the character for a second time in this prequel sequel, and the film also features William Tony Hooper, son of Tobe Hooper, the director of the original 2 Texas Chainsaw Massacre films. All-American Massacre has never been released to the public, sadly though, despite it being completely finished, which is a shame because Chop Top is personally my favorite Texas Chainsaw Massacre character. His screen presence is just so fucking good, and he literally eats every scene he's in. Anyway, the plot of All-American Massacre goes as follows, quote, "Intended to be the 25th anniversary tribute to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the film was to act as both a prequel and a sequel to the first 2 films, with flashback sections bridging the plot together. As stated in the official press release, there would be no connection to the third or fourth Chainsaw films, as these movies were not directed by the Hooper family. Set 12 years after the events of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, Chop Top has been captured and placed in a psychiatric prison. When interviewed by a tabloid newspaper, we get to see flashbacks of his life. A much younger Chop Top, now known as Bloody Bobby for copyright reasons, would make an appearance. These flashback sequences would serve as a connection to the first Chainsaw film, as we would see characters such as the Hitchhiker and Leatherface return. After these flashback sequences, Chop Top would then escape and start a new massacre, an all-American massacre. I would personally love for this film to get released at some point, as it sounds fucking amazing and a real tribute to both the OG Texas Chainsaw Massacre and its crazy, more comical sequel as well, both of which are some of my all-time favorite horror films ever made, and just films in general. But sadly, in June and July of 2013, an eBay auction with the original film negatives and 35mm film belonging to executive producer Eric H. Lasher surfaced online, but it's unknown who bought these items, and whether or not these listings contained a copy of the movie. On March 8th, 2020, a small clip of the film surfaced on YouTube, featuring Buckethead playing the character of Leatherface. This is some of the only footage that has been found of the film, besides interviews with cast members and the trailer, which I'll play some of now. Sadly though, it's believed the reason it's never publicly been released is due to copyright issues. Though personally at this point, I think just releasing the damn thing on YouTube would be good enough. Just call it a fan film and you should be just fine. But oh well. For now, it remains lost until further notice. Left 4 Dead 2, The Cabin in the Woods. This entry is about a lost build of a cancelled movie tie-in DLC for Left 4 Dead 2. I'm sure most of you know what Left 4 Dead is, the Valve-developed game where you get to play as a bunch of characters and basically fight your way through a zombie apocalypse in multiplayer action. Also, there's tons of mods for the game, as you can probably tell by the background. Meanwhile, The Cabin in the Woods is a horror comedy movie that satirizes the horror genre by telling the story of a group of college students that hide in the titular cabin to escape a zombie outbreak, only to find out that the cabin is ran by a facility which experiments with several horror movie monsters and tropes as if the building was a movie set. It's a really good movie if you haven't seen it, by the way. The Left 4 Dead 2 was so popular that Valve started creating extra downloadable content for the game pretty early on, including 2 new campaigns titled The Passing and The Sacrifice. However, a third one was in development, which was meant to be a tie-in into the Cabin in the Woods film. According to the Lost Media Wiki article on the topic, quote, according to Chet Falasek, Left 4 Dead 2's writer, both Josh Whedon and Drew Goddard, the writer and directors respectively, approached Valve after playing the game and presented the idea of building a campaign based on the movie and its premise. Goddard stated on a Reddit AMA that players would have been able to step into the cabin and even walk around the facility and fight the monsters that appear in the movie. The Cabin in the Woods was originally planned to be distributed by MGM, set for a February 5th, 2010 release, but the movie was delayed by a full year due to plans in converting the movie to 3D alongside MGM's ongoing financial struggles. However, on June 17th, MGM announced that the movie was delayed indefinitely, once again as a result of the studio's debts, which led to its Chapter 11 bankruptcy on November 3rd of 2010. With the movie indefinitely shelved, Valve quietly canceled the Left 4 Dead 2 campaign. After emerging from bankruptcy, MGM announced on March 2011 that it was going to sell the movie to another studio, Lionsgate, that ended up getting the rights to the movie, which was then finally released on April 13th of 2012. To positive reviews. Despite the cancellation of the Cabin in the Woods DLC, the infected from the Left 4 Dead games ended up making a cameo appearance in the movie during the climactic elevator scene. This Easter egg became a major topic of conversation in Drew Goddard's Reddit AMA, held later that year, where the director confirmed the existence of the DLC, apart from the campaign's premise. No footage from the campaign nor any assets have surfaced to date, unquote. So yeah, that's that. A real shame. Seems like it would have been a really fun idea for a DLC, since there's so many different monsters and creatures that you could have fought, both in the cabin and the facilities seen in the film. Dracula's Epilog. Universal's Dracula is a 1931 horror film that needs little introduction. It's one of the most classic and iconic horror films ever made, with Bela Lugosi's Dracula performance being what most people think of when they first hear the word vampire. However, there is a part of this famous film missing. See, the initial theatrical run of the movie featured an epilogue by Sloane, similar to the prologue of Frankenstein, where he directly said to the audience, quote, "Just a moment, ladies and gentlemen, a word before you go. We hope the memories of Dracula and Rainfield won't give you bad dreams. So just a word of reassurance. When you get home tonight and the lights have been turned out, and you are afraid to look behind the curtains, and you dread to see a face appear at the window, why, just pull yourself together and remember that, after all, there are such things as vampires." Unquote. When Dracula was reissued in 1936, the Motion Picture Code had this part of the film censored as not to upset religious groups, since I guess it claimed that vampires are real. And sadly, the epilogue has never been restored in future releases. Though some stills and a short clip of the epilogue can be seen in the 1999 documentary A Road to Dracula. It's really just a corny little epilogue at the end of the day, but still, it's a real shame it was cut for even more corny reasons. Event Horizon unreleased 130-minute cut. Event Horizon was a 1997 sci-fi horror film directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, the plot of which follows a rescue team in the year 2047, tasked with investigating the mysterious reappearance of a spaceship that had been lost for 7 years, only to discover in investigating it, something terrifying has come back with it. Initially, the film had a runtime of at least 130 minutes. However, when Anderson screened the film for Paramount, they were disturbed by how gruesome the film was. Thus, the studio demanded that the film be heavily edited, especially after it was also shown to test audiences who also found the film too gory. So much to Anderson's dismay, the film had about 30 minutes cut from it, specifically the extremely grim material. In a rather ironic twist of fate, while Event Horizon was a commercial and critical failure, grossing $42 million on a $60 million production budget, it did actually do very well in the home video market. So well, in fact, that Paramount contacted Anderson to begin working on a restoration of the deleted footage, but it had either been lost or destroyed in that time, thus leaving it unfinished forever. A shame, since it would go on to gain quite the cult following. While it's kind of difficult to explain all the deleted scenes without context of the movie, some of the stuff included Captain Miller finding a human tooth with gum attached to it in the corridor while exploring the ship. It is assumed that the tooth was ripped out while the original crew of the Event Horizon was being massacred. Or the bloody orgy scene that the main characters come across in the ship's log, and learning the original crew's fate was longer in the original cut. The scene lasts 20 seconds in the theatrical version, but is infamous for the incredibly graphic violence it contained, including a shot of a character being stabbed through the head and a man pulling his intestines out of his mouth. The initial version was longer and included shots of a character getting screws drilled into their teeth, and a character having their legs beaten so hard they're eventually broken off as he crawls away. And yeah, stuff like that, you get the idea. Freaks deleted scenes. Now this one is quite a doozy. Todd Browning's Freaks is a 1932 horror film that used real carnival sideshow performers with real deformities. These cast members included siblings Harry and Daisy Earls, Johnny Ick, who had sacral agenesis, Daisy and Violet Hilton, who were conjoined twins, and Schlitzie, a man with microcephaly. The plot of the film is basically about a circus trapeze artist named Cleopatra agreeing to marry Hans, the leader of the sideshow performers. But Hans' deformed friends discover that she is only marrying him for his inheritance, so they decide to get revenge. The film, however, once again is pre-code, and so it had some pretty dark content. It was extremely controversial with test audiences. In fact, one test audience member infamously stated they were going to sue MGM for giving her a miscarriage while watching. Due to this, roughly half an hour is cut from the film, cutting it down to just a 64-minute runtime. Yet even still, this final abridged cut of the movie was controversial with audiences as well, with many sadly fearing or finding the deformed actors too grotesque to watch. Because of its controversial content, the film was actually banned in the United Kingdom for over 30 years, and was labeled as brutal and grotesque in Canada. Though it should be noted that while it certainly was criticized then, over the years the movie has gained a cult following, with many noting that it presented an anti-eugenics message, and that it was an early showcase of people with these deformities getting a sympathetic portrait painted of them rather than an exploitative one, and in 1994 it was selected for preservation by the United States National Film Registry, which seeks to preserve films that are culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Nonetheless though, what exactly was cut from the film? Well, according to the Lost Media Wiki, quote, "Scenes were cut short, small comedy bits were cut. Many of the cuts included the relationship between the character Venus and Borso, many cuts of the growing hatred between Venus and Hercules, which leads to near the end of the film where he attacks her with the intention to kill and fight Borso. A very shocking and different ending compared to the happy one MGM included, where the chase scene of Cleo is longer, and included the freaks chasing Hercules, which leads to the infamous chicken scene, but states that she is now senseless, and also shows a castrated Hercules," unquote. In case you're wondering, by film's end, the sideshow people band together and make Cleo into a freak, turning her into a fucking chicken thing somehow. The extra bit certainly sounds quite grisly as well, and all these cut parts of the movie are now lost due to most movie companies at the time either not saving the cut parts of a film or just taking poor care of it in general. It deleted scene. This one is referencing to a lost deleted scene from the 2017 adaptation of the 1986 Stephen King novel. I won't go into the plot, but basically a bunch of kids are being haunted and tormented by a weird, creepy clown demon that feeds off of their fear. So they eventually got a band together to fucking kill the clown. While there is a lot of deleted scenes from the film, most can be viewed via the Blu-ray release of said film, with most kind of just being extra scenes with nothing major there. However, there's still one deleted scene that has yet to be shown in any release of the film to date, that was in the original script and had actor Bill Skarsgård, who plays the titular It Pennywise, mentioned existing. According to the Lost Media Wiki, quote, "Set in a dark midnight afternoon in 1637, it began with a 19-year-old woman named Abigail rushing into a well house, which would be the creature's lair, as she tries to calm down her crying baby, when all of a sudden, an unnatural force causes the room's chandelier lights to rapidly rotate as a black silhouette slithers from the well's gray shadows. It turns out to be none other than a naked, pale Pennywise with a barely human-like body in his huge maw full of razor-sharp teeth. As the light hits his face, it takes on a different form at once: a man, woman, beast, and a monster. Pennywise boasts to Abigail about being the eater of worlds, upon hearing her call him the devil, and smells the intensifying fear of her child with each cry it makes. Abigail tries offering herself to the monster in the hopes the baby will be safe, though it boasts he will take both of them, along with her husband and the rest of the world until there's nothing left but weeds. It then offers a sadistic option, where he takes the baby and spares the lives of both Abigail and her other child, a 6-year-old boy. As Abigail tearfully kisses away her baby and says she's sorry before turning him away, the lights of the room spin even faster, while Pennywise slowly crawls towards the baby, who cries once more until a sickening crunch is heard, implying it ate the child. As for Abigail, she keeps looking at the bright orange glow of the flickering fire, which turns out to be nothing more than the dead lights, its true form that causes anyone who takes one mere glance at them to either go permanently insane or die. Unquote. This scene was said to be released at a later point, but it is yet to show up anywhere, with the only visual evidence of this scene existing being this picture of the scene. Seems pretty interesting, and it would certainly be interesting to see, though I won't lie, when I first saw the title of this entry, I got a little worried, because I thought it was going to be about the orgy scene between all the kids in the film that thankfully has never shown up in either adaptation of this novel, but is nonetheless right stuck there in the middle of this novel by Stephen King. Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, Bela Lugosi's monster dialogue. So, this entry is referring to some cut dialogue delivered by Bela Lugosi in the film Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. This movie is notable in that it introduces the iconic Frankenstein walk and was an overall pretty strange portrayal of the monster up until this point, since he hadn't done that in the previous 4 films. But there is a reason for this. Originally, the monster would have spoken dialogue in this film, and according to the Lost Media Wiki, quote, legendary horror film actor Bela Lugosi had previously portrayed Igor in the 1939 Son of Frankenstein and the 1942 Ghost of Frankenstein. He had also been cast as the monster in the first movie and later backed out, regretting his decision. Lugosi was glad to be playing the monster in this film. However, at the climax of Ghost of Frankenstein, Igor gets his brain transplanted into the monster's body and ends up losing his eyesight. This would cause a change in the next film. The dialogue for the monster in the film would be different than the dialogue from the previous films. Reportedly, the monster would have a split personality, switching between itself and Igor. Lines included, "Frankenstein gave me life, and his son gave me a brain." The dialogue was a big part of the story, explaining things such as the monster being blind, which, when cut, ended up creating the Frankenstein walk, which is why he stretches his arms straight. After the footage was shot, the test audiences found the monster speaking with Lugosi's natural Hungarian accent ridiculous and unintentionally funny. This was what is generally assumed to be the reason that the dialogue was cut. This caused a few inconsistencies, such as when the monster is brought to full power, his eyes flutter open, and he can be seen smiling. This was meant to signify that he had regained his sight and strength, the blindness as well as the weakness which was to be explained previously. The dialogue has been lost and is assumed to have been destroyed by Universal, which is a real shame. On a semi-related note, I'll never forget watching this movie for the first time as a kid and being so excited to see Frankenstein's monster and the Wolfman fight, only to be like super disappointed that they actually only end up fighting by like the very end of the movie for just a small little bit of time. Rocky Horror Picture Show Open Map Version. The Rocky Horror Picture Show is a 1975 musical comedy, horror, and a general cult classic that's about a couple whose car breaks down near a castle. And when they go inside, it's a place full of people in elaborate costumes, and it is controlled by Dr. Frankenfurter, a mad scientist and an alien transvestite from the planet Transsexual in the galaxy of Transylvania, who creates a living muscle man named Rocky. It's quite the trip if you couldn't tell. At any rate, as the Lost Media Wiki notes, quote, "Many films were originally recorded in an open shot or open matte version. These versions of the film had the top and bottom of them matted out to obtain a widescreen look for the theatrical releases of the films, later to become useful for viewing on widescreen or HD TV televisions, though unintentional. For cases of 4x3 televisions or general home releases, the top and bottom of the film is still matted out, though less has been matted out than the widescreen version, allowing the film to fit correctly on these televisions. These 4x3 versions, coincidentally, have more information than the widescreen versions available to see. The open matte versions can have certain objects such as camera or boom mics viewable near the top of the frame, that when matted out are not viewable in the widescreen and 4x3 versions of the film, hence why open matte versions are not the preferred way to watch these films," unquote. Bearing all that in mind, the open matte version of the Rocky Horror Picture Show is lost, with the only available clips of it being the song Sweet Transvestite, taken from an educational television center in the United Kingdom that was about to transition to color, but was still in black and white. Thus, we have, for example, this still from it here. Certainly not the best quality, but yeah, that's basically it. The Shining deleted scenes. Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is a 1980s psychological horror film based on the 1977 novel by Stephen King, and is widely considered to be one of the greatest horror films ever made, with it sparking much debate and discussion regarding its symbolism, the way scenes are shot, the various trippy and eerie scenes, and just in general, is considered one of Stanley Kubrick's best works, despite Stephen King not being a fan of it. The film itself follows Jack Torrance and his wife and son, who go to live in the giant Overlook Hotel. Jack actually has a job to maintain the hotel, as it can't be opened due to the cruel winter, and he also takes his time to write what he hopes is his magnum opus novel. I won't go into all the details, as it's easy to get lost in the weeds of this film, but as for the deleted scenes, most were taken out to tighten up the pace or deepen the film's sense of ambiguity, and there is a ton of deleted scenes from the film, some of which include Jack's drive to the Overlook Extended. The opening scene of Jack driving to the Overlook Hotel for his interview initially was longer. There were shots of Jack inside his car. These were filmed on the same rear screen set as the scene featured in the final film of Torrance's discussing the Donner Party, Danny's hedge maze vision. Right before Wendy and Danny enter the hedge maze at 38 minutes, a scene where Danny would have experienced a vision while staring into the model hedge maze was cut. This would have been a slow tracking shot zooming into his face. A vision of Jack's fate. A vision of the hedge maze model covered in snow was cut, which slowly panned in to show a miniature of Jack's frozen body visible inside of it. It is unknown when this scene took place. The Torrances play in the snow. After the snowstorm begins, a scene in which Jack joins Wendy and Danny out in the snow was cut. Wendy and Danny engage in a snowball fight and encourage Jack to join them. Upon starting to play, Wendy gets upset at Jack for throwing them too hard. Long after principal photography had wrapped on The Shining, Kubrick's assistant Leon Vitali flew all the way to Malta to visit Duval on the set of Popeye for her to record a wild track for this scene. Despite their efforts, it was cut. Jack looks out the window extended. This iconic shot of Jack looking out the window originally began with a wide shot of the lounge. Jack would stretch and yawn as he grew bored writing. He then would approach the window, closing in on the shot seen in the final film. Wendy cradles injured Danny. A scene of Wendy carrying the injured Danny down the halls of the Overlook following her argument with Jack at the 62-minute mark. This scene was just discovered in an auction for a work print reel belonging to Kubrick's assistant Emilio D. Alessandro. It is unknown who won the auction, leaving question and speculation whether or not the public eye will ever see this footage. After Wendy makes it back to her room, she cradles the catatonic Danny as Jack begins pounding on the door to be let in. After threatening violence, Jack kicks the door a couple of times and storms off. Jack discovers the truth behind room 237. Following the previous scene of Jack wandering the hotel after his encounter in room 237, he would make his way to the scrapbook on his desk. Inside, he would learn of a bathtub woman's suicide after a lover's quarrel, learning about how she would become the creature he just saw. The scene ended with a close-up of Jack shutting the scrapbook closed, unquote. It should also be noted that this scrapbook was going to be a plot element that was originally in the novel version, but would be cut entirely from the film version because the scrapbook revealed a lot of the mysteries that were in the hotel, and it was decided it would be better to have the creepy scenes without any context for any of them to really add to the mystery and mystique of the film. There are also tons and tons more deleted scenes, but I don't want to harp on too long with one entry. But if you're interested, I highly recommend you go checking out the Lost Media Wiki article for more info on all those lost scenes. But I would like to bring up the deleted epilogue of the film, as the story behind it is pretty interesting. Quote, "The most famous deleted scene of all is the removed epilogue for the film. After Jack freezes to death in the hedge maze at the 1:39-minute mark, the film then would have faded to daytime, where a group of police officers investigate the hedge maze, unable to find Jack's frozen corpse. It then would have cut to the Overlook manager, Stuart Ullman, walking down a hospital corridor to meet a nurse, playing snakes and ladders at the reception desk with Danny. He lets Ullman into the room where Wendy is staying, informing her that the authorities couldn't find any trace of the supernatural events she witnessed nor Jack's body. Ullman sympathizes that anyone would have witnessed such hallucinations due to the horror she went through at the hotel, and invites her and Danny to stay at his suite in Los Angeles. On his way out, he proclaims to Danny he almost forgot something, tossing the same tennis ball Jack was playing with earlier in the film to his hands. Ullman bids Danny goodbye, and then the film fades to the photograph shot it typically ends on. The scene was included in early screenings of the film in Los Angeles and New York. Hearing about the negative reception The Shining was receiving, Kubrick began to attend some of these screenings himself to survey audience reactions. Upon leaving the auditorium, he noticed a fell swoop of silence as viewers would leave immediately, as the credits started. Curious to see how audience may react, the epilogue was cut in certain screenings, which instigated a much different atmosphere as the movie ended. The audience felt a buzz and applauded as they sat through the credits discussing the meaning of the film. Kubrick wrote the epilogue because of the affinity he felt for both Danny and Wendy, desiring to reassure the audience that they were okay upon surviving the events of the Overlook. However, after seeing this discrepancy in audience reaction to these two cuts of the film, he decided perhaps he went the wrong direction in providing these answers to the viewer. Thus, he ordered Warner Bros. To contract an editor to physically cut the scene from the reels, as it was included at these early screenings. The deleted epilogue of The Shining remains a heavily discussed topic in the history of cinema to this day. Film critic Roger Ebert, who attended one of these early screenings, commented in 2006, "Kubrick was wise to remove that epilogue. It pulled one rug too many out from under the story. At some level, it is necessary for us to believe the three members of the Torrance family are actually residents of the hotel during that winter. Whatever happens, or whatever they think happens." All the film lifts of said scene were reportedly destroyed, leaving chances slim to none that the epilogue will ever again meet the public eye. However, many believe that there may be one or two surviving prints out there, with the discovery of the extended cut of 2001: A Space Odyssey serving as a glimmer of hope. Alas, as per Kubrick's wishes, the lost 2001 footage was decided not to be released by Warner Bros. And his estate. As for The Shining, only time will tell if the deleted epilogue, or any other cut footage for that matter, will ever surface, seemingly remaining a ghostly memory among those who have seen it, like the ones that sleep within the Overlook, unquote. It would certainly be interesting to see some, if not all, of these extra scenes and deleted stuff in a possible new Blu-ray release or something as bonus features. But it's also a clear example of how sometimes the stuff cut from a film actually makes it a far better film, it being cut rather than it being included. Sometimes the stuff you cut is just as important as the stuff that you decide to keep, in how it changes the way the story is conveyed to the viewer. The Thing Practical Cut. This entry is referring to the practical cut of the 2011 remake of The Thing, or rather not a remake, but I guess a prequel to John Carpenter's cult classic of the same name. The film, originally shot with almost entirely practical effects supplied by Amalgamated Dynamics, which was done as a clear homage to the 1982 original, because that film is renowned for its use of practical effects and just how fucking good and gnarly it all looks. It would be a disservice to not use them in a sequel or a prequel. But sadly, while this 2011 film did have all practical effects when it was originally created, apparently the film itself received a negative response from test audiences, and this led Universal Studios to have the film re-edited where CGI would now cover up all the practical effects, animatronics, and makeup done for the film, effectively rendering all that art and hard work completely worthless. This was all for naught though, as the film still received mixed reviews upon release, leaving the team behind those effects as well as the film's director truly saddened by what the studio had done to their film for pretty much no reason. This, however, has led many to want to see the original cut of the film that is confirmed to completely exist, most likely in Universal's archives, which honestly I'm surprised they haven't released by this point. Just slap it on a Blu-ray and maybe a streaming service and advertise it as the original uncut version. It's basically free money at this point, and there are many who have campaigned for its release since then. Only time will tell if we will ever end up seeing it. The Thing deleted scenes. Speaking of The Thing, there's actually some deleted scenes from the 1982 The Thing as well, though many of these cut parts have seen the light of day in some lower quality syndication cuts of the film or just in other releases. Some of the scenes have been cut completely, including, quote, a scene where the crew is having to drink in the dining room, a location never seen in the final cut, only a still photograph exists. A scene where Buck sedates the surviving dogs, likely cut so they could use the one where Blair and Clark sedate a dog, only it still exists. Most infamously, a cut scene where McReady watches some of the Norwegian tapes alone in his cabin whilst playing with a blow-up sex doll. It is unknown why it was cut, and all that exists are a single photograph from it. Carpenter also filmed 2 alternate endings of the film, one in which was only filmed in case executives didn't like his nihilistic approach. In the first ending, McReady awaits his death in the cold, but is found just in time by the rescue team, who attempt to confirm his identity with a blood test. It is still apparently left ambiguous, although McReady more than likely survived. Although it made it as far as test screenings, audiences seem to prefer the darker ending. It is unknown what happens to Childs in this ending. Only a production photograph has surfaced, proving the ending was filmed. Given it made it to a test screen, it's possible it survives in the possession of Carpenter or simply lies in a vault. The second ending was a scene that has never been shown publicly, removing Childs completely, as he was a victim of the Thing at this point. It's unknown what the scene would have entailed, as McReady would have either died alone or been rescued, without an additional character to make the scene more interesting. No photograph has ever surfaced, leaving the ending and its fate largely unknown. This man. Man, this one fucking entry has managed to make its way to like nearly every one of my icebergs. I'm sorry, but I'm gonna summarize this one as this. This Man was a planned horror film that was first advertised online as a creepypasta of sorts called Ever Dreamed This Man?, in which a fake site was made where many people claimed to have seen this man in their dreams, and different theories as to who it might be or what it means is proposed. It's a pretty cool concept, but ultimately it didn't go anywhere. The actual film itself was about, quote, an ordinary guy who discovers that people he has never met are seeing him in their dreams. Now he must find out why he is the source of nightmares for strangers all over the world, unquote. Again, seems kind of interesting, but it ultimately never went out of the concept stage as it seems. Hellraiser canceled NES game. Yes, just like Friday the 13th and the Nightmare on Elm Street, the Hellraiser franchise too was going to get an NES game back in the day. This NES game was apparently developed by Color Dreams, who are infamously known for creating unlicensed video games of rather poor quality. If you're at all familiar with the Angry Video Game Nerd series, you'll probably know them better under their other name, Wisdom Tree, which they made a bunch of games based around the Bible under, including most infamously Super 3D Noah's Ark, a fucking Wolfenstein 3D clone, or hack rather, where you play as Noah, knocking out a bunch of donkeys with a slingshot. But anyway, this company released unlicensed games, which, as the Lost Media Wiki notes, quote, Nintendo required that all game companies that wanted to release a game on the Nintendo Entertainment System had to pay for the games to be evaluated by Nintendo and given an official license to release the game on their system. Due to either not wanting to pay the fee or to avoid rejection by Nintendo, Color Dreams went around this by bypassing the 10 NES lockout chip and released games without a license on the NES, typically in a unique baby blue or black cartridge, unquote. Dan Lawton, one of the founders of Color Dreams, had recently watched the film Hellraiser and really loved it, so he convinced his partners and the movie studio, and before long he had acquired the rights to create a video game based on the film, spending around $35,000 to $50,000 on the whole thing. However, this would be a rather ambitious game for the hardware and software that the NES could handle, and Lawton's plans for the engine of the game would require them to create a new special type of NES cartridge, a sort of super cartridge as the article notes. Quote, this cartridge came to be known as the Super Cartridge. This special cartridge contained a Z80 processor, programmable array logic chip, and an additional 4 megabytes of RAM. It was also capable of intercepting the NES processor's ROM and RAM accesses, so it could manipulate video in real time, as well as allowing pixel-by-pixel manipulation of the screen, some sprite manipulation, and also supported panning and zooming in on hardware, such as fully animated backgrounds. Essentially, this meant that the game could switch colors between scans of the TV in real time, and increase the effective number of colors on screen. While the cartridge itself worked fine, the palette switching effect wasn't working as intended, as it didn't switch between colors fast enough. Another method to create the game was in the way of an add-on device sold separately that would be plugged into the expansion port at the bottom of the NES system. The combined cost of the add-on expansion and the Hellraiser cart would have been more expensive than the Super Cartridge itself, unquote. The gameplay would have had you playing as a character trapped in the Le Marchand's puzzle box from the film. And for those who don't know, this puzzle box is a mystical/mechanical device that acts as a door, or a key to a door, to another dimension or plane of existence. The inhabitants of said realm being these demonic creatures, Cenobites. And while a little more complicated, it's basically a portal to hell, where you're gonna fucking suffer and be tortured forever. Have fun. Anyway, so the game would have had you have to find ways to manipulate the puzzle box while you're in this hellscape to escape, and of course the Cenobites would try to stop you as you went along. And every time you messed with the cube, the world inside the cube would change, affecting the level layout, and eventually by game's end you would escape this hell, but bring the demons with you, with you needing to solve the puzzle in reverse order now to defeat them. However, this game was ultimately cancelled, as the special cart it needed to function would have just cost way too much money to produce en masse, and without a retailer support, it was just just a bad business venture overall. It does make me wonder if it could have worked if it was on the Super Nintendo instead, but then again, hacks on the Super Nintendo were also much more difficult to do, so maybe they kinda had their hands tied with that one. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream uncut version. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is a horror/science fiction adventure game that was released in 1995 on the PC, developed by Cyberdreams and Harlan Ellison. It is based on the Harlan Ellison short story of the same name, the premise of which is, quote, "The story is set 100 years in the future. All of humanity has been killed by a mad, extremely powerful, and hateful sentient computer called AM, or AM, Allied Master Computer, and he has kept alive 5 people that he has tortured for all this time. One day he decides to send them in virtual worlds, where each one of them is forced to confront their tormented pasts or their inner flaws. There is Gorrister, a trucker who is remorseful, but having driven his wife mad. Benny, the hideously deformed soldier. Ellen, a female engineer who has a phobia of the color yellow. Ted, the paranoid young estate agent. And Nimdok, an elderly German doctor," unquote. The game is well known for its extremely dark setting and story, and overall depressing themes. However, there is evidence that the game was once much darker than it is now. On the British TV show Game Master, where this unsightly fucking thing is the, Game Master, I guess, there was a gore special episode in 1995, which showcased several gory and shocking moments from video games at the time. And here, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream was showcased, but with several scenes that were never seen in the full game by the time it was released later on. Examples of these include, quote, "The meat locker in Gorrister's scenario has human bodies hanging on the hooks. The official release replaces 2 of these bodies with slabs of beef meat instead. A puppy is featured in Gorrister's scenario in a close-up that takes the whole screen. It looks sickly, and Gorrister seems to be able to bring it back to health. The commentators say that it is done by feeding a human heart, showing the stabbing of Harry, which is not cut in the end product, and that the puppy would help Gorrister on his quest. The puppy seems to like it and would have been on the airship among the other caged, electrocuted animals. The official release has a talking jackal to whom Gorrister must feed the heart, that can be human or not. Ellen's death screen, where she is attacked by a menacing, thinly bald figure in front of a yellow stone wall, shown as shadows cast on the wall, as most death scenes in the game. The official release has a similar scene where Ellen is attacked by her resurrected, but the shadows on the wall are different, as he is wearing a janitor uniform, and the attack is set in a modern elevator. It is possible that the was to originally appear as a mummy, since Ellen's scenario is set in an Egyptian pyramid. Some evidence of embalming remaining around, and she enters a sarcophagus to confront him. Benny eating a baby. In the official release, Benny can find an empty cradle in a cave. The beginning of his scenario has him extremely hungry and trying to eat whatever he can find, but usually vomiting it back up with blood, unquote. While no official reason has been given for why these things were cut from the final version of the game, it's possible it was done to avoid some sort of controversy, as the character of Benny is actually gay in the novel version, and it's rather important detail about him, and AM actually forcibly turns Benny heterosexual via brainwashing to further torment him, and there are hints of this plot detail originally being in the game as well, but never made it in, most likely again to avoid controversy. All the same, this version of the game, in all it had cut from it, has never surfaced as of yet online. A Nightmare on Elm Street NES game prototype. So, to quote the Lost Media Wiki article, A Nightmare on Elm Street is a 1990 action platformer released on the NES based on the horror film series of the same name. It is created by British-based developer Rare, known for games such as Donkey Kong 64 and Banjo-Kazooie series, and published by LJN, who are infamous for releasing licensed games of very poor quality, especially on the NES. Unquote. Once again, fans of the AVGN are sure to be familiar with this game, the core concept of which sees you playing as a teenager trying to defeat Freddy Krueger by traveling to different locations on Elm Street to find and destroy Freddy Krueger's bones, the only method of permanently killing him, all while attempting to keep your sleep meter from depleting. If the sleep meter depletes completely, then you'll be transported to the Dream Realm, where you can be attacked by Freddy and much more powerful enemies reside. Most of this game's narrative and even gameplay ideas are all mostly inspired off of the third Nightmare on Elm Street film, The Dream Warriors, though that one is often considered a fan favorite amongst the sequels, so that kind of makes sense. While the game itself is only okay and considered kind of a letdown by most, it was once going to be far more ambitious as a game, again as noted in the article. Quote, "The game went through notable changes over the course of its development, and, based on pre-release screenshots and publicity blurbs, was quite a different, more ambitious game." According to an advertisement featured in a 1988 issue of Nintendo Power, the original premise was that the player would control Freddy himself, with the goal being to murder the teens attempting to find his bones. Freddy would be able to freely traverse the dream world by warping through pipes, electrical outlets, and mirrors. After its initial announcement, the game's status was unknown until fall of 1989, when in a Nintendo Power number 8 was featured in an article about the NES satellite peripheral. This time, the player character was simply an Elm Street teen. The article included 2 more screenshots from the prototype that would become the title screen, and one of Freddy fighting a group of kids, arguably still the player character by this point. Although LJN had apparently begun restructuring the game by 1989, the presence of these images, most of which include assets that would be used in the finished product, such as the title screen, seemed to imply that development had reached the point where the game's prototype build was mostly playable. It was delayed until 1990, which further implies retooling by Rare and LJN's part. No official explanation has been given for such a radical change, but considering Nintendo's reputation for producing family-friendly games, and the financial failures contributed by earlier licensed horror games like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween on the Atari 2600, many game stores refused to stock the former due to the fact that the killer was playable. It's entirely possible that either Nintendo or LGN ordered Rare to remake the game with a safer concept to avoid drawing controversy. Aside from the screenshots and articles listed, there is little other information on the original version of the game. While LGN has been defunct since 1995, it is possible that Rare or someone who worked on the game has a copy of the prototype." Unquote. It's a shame because it sounds like it would have been a really interesting scenario, and hell, it could have even been one of those things where there's 2 versions of the game, where on one campaign you play as the teens trying to defeat Freddy, and in another version of the campaign you play as Freddy trying to defeat the teens. But all well. Silent Hill's build of a cancelled sequel. So this one is pretty famous and infamous at this point. Silent Hills was a cancelled horror game meant to be a new installment of the Silent Hill series. It was going to be directed by Hideo Kojima, famous for his Metal Gear Solid series, and other people were involved like film director Guillermo del Toro and actor Norman Reedus. And on August 12th of 2014, a teaser game entitled PT, an abbreviation of Playable Teaser, was released on the PlayStation Store, and it was later revealed at the end of this playable teaser there was an official teaser for this new Silent Hill game. PT gained quite a lot of attention for its cryptic gameplay elements, atmosphere, and for its mysterious, almost ARG-like nature, with it all revealing it to be a new Silent Hill game by the end. It got a lot of people excited, and though while I personally don't really see how it was going to be very much like a Silent Hill game, it kind of seeming like its own thing entirely, just with the name Silent Hill kind of slapped on by the end, it nonetheless was very, very influential, with many indie horror games afterwards trying to essentially become the new PT, or emulate it, or have an official PT release of any kind, because the actual PT and Silent Hills never came to be, as in 2015, Hideo Kojima was laid off from Konami by the end of that year, and with that the project Silent Hills was cancelled, and the demo was later removed from the PlayStation Store, making it impossible to play unless you already downloaded it and kept it downloaded. I won't go into all the details since this is one of those far more well-known pieces of lost media, but basically this game, Silent Hills, never came to be, and the PT demo is no longer officially playable, though you can watch playthroughs of the game pretty readily on YouTube. And with that PlayStation 4 emulator making really great progress, maybe it will also be eventually playable through that as well, so I suppose we'll see. Five Nights at Freddy's early trailer. I'm sure I don't have to tell you what Five Nights at Freddy's is as a series, but this entry is about the first entry in the series, and its supposed lost early trailer for the game. According to the Lost Media Wiki, quote, on June 14th, 2014, Scott Cawthon uploaded the Five Nights at Freddy's trailer to his channel. Soon after, a user called Wallmeat commented about another trailer. Years after the original comment was made, on July 15th, 2020, a Redditor named Sal Kalikmek, I think I said that fucking right, was able to contact Wallmeat on Twitter. He said it wasn't on Scott's channel anymore. The trailer was said to have featured an endoskeleton that isn't in the final game. A user called InvisibleFox23 commented with a picture of the endoskeleton. For a while, people kept searching until another Redditor named The Freddy Channel found a Wayback Machine link to Scott's old Google Plus account. There were 3 deleted videos. 2 of the deleted videos were later re-uploaded to Scott's channel, but the third one, simply called Five Nights, wasn't. This was believed to be the rumored trailer. The link, however, is dead, rendering the video completely lost. Then, on July 16th, 2020, Wallmeat made a post on Zitter where he debunked the existence of the trailer. He said that when he was making that comment, he accidentally talked about the current trailer. In reality, he was talking about the red-eyed endoskeleton image, while the regular endoskeleton appeared in the trailer, and the existence of the trailer has been debunked. It still leaves the content of the Five Nights video a complete mystery though, unquote. So yeah, basically it didn't actually exist in short, though many people have pointed out that the Five Nights video is still a bit of a mystery as to what it held. Personally, I think it was probably just a fucking test video of some kind, or maybe it was a upload of the trailer that Scott Cawthon just decided he didn't like as much. Maybe there's a rendering issue. I mean, who fucking knows? Probably something like that. Cry Baby Lane. Quote, Cry Baby Lane is a Halloween-themed comedy horror made for TV film that originally aired on Nickelodeon's television block, SNICK, on the night of October 28th, 2000. After its premiere, it was never released in any form of home media, or aired outside the United States, and wouldn't be aired again for over a decade. That's the basic idea according to the wiki, and the plot of this film is about, quote, a young Andrew and his older brother Carl conduct a seance in their local graveyard in an effort to impress a group of girls. Unknowingly, they release the soul of a dead Siamese twin. Whatever the evil twin touches turns evil, and by the next day, havoc is wreaked upon the town. After Carl becomes possessed, Andrew travels to Crybaby Lane and cut the root out of the heart of the good twin to end the effects of the evil twin's reign of terror, unquote. Now the thing is, for the time that this was lost media, there was a lot of rumors and discussion over the content of the movie, as apparently when the film aired, there was a lot of complaints about the movie from parents, as they found the film to be too intense and was not appropriate for children to watch. This allegedly caused Nickelodeon to apologize and act as if they had not even made the film at all, that the airing of the movie was instead a mistake. This only added to the mystery as people remembered seeing this film very clearly back in the day and began relaying their memories of seeing it, and many others began to wonder just what type of content lay inside this film. How intense was it really? What would make Nick effectively sweep it under the rug and completely disown it? It sounds a lot like a creepypasta, doesn't it? And I remember in particular, this led to a rather infamous creepypasta of the same name being written, the contents of which detailed the dark content of the film, and that it was truly awful and featured kids getting tortured, and that the director behind the film had a high rank in Nickelodeon and was very influential, and that every other show he helped produce had a far more sinister purpose or meaning behind it, and that despite this, everyone at Nickelodeon, outside of our protagonist, saw him as a genius who kept rolling out hit after hit, and maybe that creepypasta wasn't totally as off base from reality as we might have thought, but nonetheless, the mystery behind all of this would launch a huge investigation online to find this film or get more information about it. When people tried to contact people at Nickelodeon, they would deny knowing anything about it, or that it even existed, despite it, well, clearly existing and there being overwhelming evidence that it did exist. Some Nick employees even spreading lies and claiming that the whole thing was a myth, and given that we knew it actually existed, it only added to this whole thing being all the more creepy and mysterious. However, as the article notes, the film would eventually be found. Quote, in 2011, a user of the social media forum Reddit named Fire Salad Peach claimed she had a bootleg VHS of the film recorded on the night of its original premiere. On the thread on the talk board r/today I learned. She later released the film on a file-sharing website and on YouTube, attracting hundreds of viewers. The sudden spike in popularity the Reddit thread had garnered is speculated to have prompted Teen Nick to re-air the film on October 31st of 2011, where they proclaimed in advertising that it was Nickelodeon's dark secret, so scary it was banned from TV. The airing ultimately revealed that Nickelodeon had the film all along. The film was originally rated TVY7 in 2000, but in its 2011 re-release, it was re-rated to PG. Oddly enough, in its 2017 re-airing, Nickelodeon had removed the rating in its entirety. The film's director, Peter Lauer, was interviewed soon after its rediscovery, and said that he was surprised and flattered by the attention this film has gotten, 11 years after its original release. He claimed that he was unaware of its supposed banning by Nickelodeon, stating that he just assumed they didn't show it again because they didn't like it. I thought it failed, and I moved on. The Nickelodeon representative later claimed that the film was never banned, disowned, or destroyed by Nickelodeon, but was merely forgotten. Despite the speculated initial outrage and Nickelodeon's attitude towards the film, it has achieved a cult following, unquote. So yeah, and after people finally got to go watch the film, myself included, you can see it all here on YouTube, and it's got some definitely dark themes and stuff, but it's definitely nothing too crazy. It's about on tier with like a Goosebumps episode or something. Friday the 13th, Part 2 Deleted Scenes. Friday the 13th Part 2 is the 1981 sequel to the 1980 classic Friday the 13th. It's the film where Jason Voorhees is properly the main slasher villain, and is a damn great slasher film in my opinion. That being said, something that was oddly missing from it was the gore effects that could be found within Part 1, and, well, frankly, all the other parts in general too, with the film instead often cutting away in super quick shots when Jason kills someone, so the special effects and gore are just not really there as much in this one. However, this is not for lack of them never having them, but instead because they were cut, because apparently the film's gore was so intense that the film was getting an X rating by the MPAA, which forced the editors to trim 48 seconds of violent shots from the film in order to get an R rating. These shots include, quote, an additional close-up of the head in Alice's refrigerator was cut. Additionally, Alice's death was longer and more graphic, showing the ice pick exiting through her face. Crazy Ralph's death lingers longer as he slowly dies from being strangled. The scene where Jason kills a policeman is extended. The slit throat effect for Scott is considerably longer, with a lot more bloodletting. Mark's death blow shows the initial impact of the machete hitting his face before he falls backwards in his wheelchair. And perhaps most infamous of all, the double impalement scene originally showed a spear penetrating both Jeff and Sandra in graphic detail. Still, this scene was published in Fangoria before the movie was released, and later reused as a picture on the back cover of the VHS release. The uncut footage shows the impact of the spear, more reaction shots, and much more gore effects. Finally, Vicky's death shows more footage of her leg wound and lingers longer on her dying. The uncut shot ends with the camera panning over to Jeff's corpse, unquote. Sadly, I can't show you examples of these shots without this video getting age restricted, but they have since been found, and you can actually see them all via the Shoutbox Friday the 13th Collection Deluxe Edition, as the scenes were luckily found on a VHS tape owned by the film's special effects artist Carl Fullerton, who sought to preserve his work in light of the heavy MPA censorship. Also, if you really just want to see the kills uncut with some nice editing to make it fit together, I suggest you watch MFMT's video on YouTube showing all the kills uncut. On that note, there are also a few additional cutscenes from the film that are still lost, and in one case for a very good reason. Quote, a scene was also cut at the end of the movie where the mummified head of Jason's mother opens her eyes and smiles in a freeze frame before the credits roll. This was cut as the director Steve Miner decided it lessened the movie's impact. And then actress Marta Kober had lied about her age before filming a sex scene that involved full frontal nudity. When Paramount discovered this, her sex scene was severely trimmed. In addition to all the uncut footage, Fullerton's tape also contained effects-heavy footage from the ending that doesn't appear to have been censored in the theatrical release. These scenes include Jason jumping through a window to attack Jenny and a close-up of Mrs. Voorhees' head. Unquote. It's funny, Jason's mother head smiling was always something I felt was going to happen in the last frames of the film, with instead just freeze-framing on her still head. But I also get why they decided against showing her smile, as it was kind of corny. As for the actress Marta Kober part, yeah. Friday the 13th, Part 13. So in case you didn't know, the Friday the 13th series has exactly 12 films under its belt, with the 13th one never having come out, because of a ton of issues legally speaking these days, but also because it seems like the series is truly cursed to never finally get its 13th film, with this entry being specifically about Paramount's plans to make a new movie for the series back when they acquired the rights for it in 2013. This film went through quite a lot of development hell, however, as we know of at least 3 different drafts for what the film was going to be about, the first of which being described by writer and director David Bruckner as an 80s coming-of-age monster movie with a found-footage style of filming, which admittedly sounds pretty interesting for a Friday the 13th film, but I don't imagine it would be the thing fans would want after having to wait so long for a new sequel at first. So eventually this direction was changed to be a more traditional slasher film. So a second screenplay was pitched under the title of Friday the 13th 3D and would have taken place in the summer of 1988. And from there the script sounds kind of like it would have been a pseudo remake of Part 2, with the camp counselors finding out that Jason didn't die in the lake and that the legend about him still being alive out there in the wilderness is true. And then as the camp counselors try to kill Jason, he apparently gets stronger after each attempt. Then the film would have ended with the last surviving counselors leaving the town, only to discover that Jason is still alive, leaving it open for a sequel. And indeed there was plans for a sequel set during the winter, and David Bruckner was still set to direct these films. But none of this ever ended up going beyond the scripting phase, though you can actually read the entire script in full for this one if you like. Then we have the final screenplay, with the wiki describing it as, quote, this was a draft of the film that had the most development time and was the closest to completion. Now known as Friday the 13th Part 13, the film was to take place in Camp Crystal Lake in 1977. 2 camp counselors are murdered atop the camp's fire lookout tower by a man wearing a sack mask. The audience is to assume this masked man is Jason. However, we soon learn it is Elias Voorhees, Jason's father. The first 40 minutes of the film is focused on Elias. Elias is ultimately killed by his wife Pamela Voorhees in a fit of rage, and the movie then focuses on her. After witnessing her son drown, the second half of the film plays out much like the first Friday the 13th movie. Ultimately, there would have been 3 killers in the movie: Elias, Pamela, and Jason. After watching his mother die, Jason would then go on a full rampage for the rest of the film, before he is ultimately defeated, unquote. Breck Eisner was set to direct the film, with writer Aaron, and it would have been a hard R film to be released on May 13th, 2016. This was later pushed back to January 13th, 2017, and then October 13th, 2017, before then just eventually being cancelled. It's still unclear as to why it was cancelled, though it's rumored that the poor box office performance of Rings, which was another horror reboot produced by Paramount, got them cold feet over it, which really fucking sucks. Once again, you can go read the script in full if you like. It's a shame because This one sounds like it would have been pretty fucking cool. I really like that they include Jason's father in this, since this is something that is never really explored, and the fact that the whole family could be kind of psychopathic and everything would be kind of a funny and disturbing twist on the whole thing. But sadly, we now exist in the ongoing Friday the 13th movie limbo, so what can you do? The Phantom of the Opera 1925 original ending. Another one of Lon Chaney's classic performances, the 1925 film is truly a classic, one that once had a far more tragic ending. See, Chaney's Phantom received an ending that differed from the source material a fair bit, that being the 1911 novel by Gaston Leroux, with the 1925 film concluding with an angry mob chasing the Phantom from his lair and into the streets of Paris before killing him. It kind of playing out like a lot of Universal monster movies that would come out later, such as Frankenstein and the like, with them just chasing off the monster before he is killed. While the original ending that was filmed for the film was going to be much more in line with the novel's ending, the Phantom would kidnap Christine and threaten to blow up the opera house if she didn't marry him. Christine shows actual compassion for the Phantom and agrees to marry him, which, just as the novel, makes him stop and let her go. That one moment of earnest compassion being the only thing he ever wanted, that he craved for, and because he loves her so much, he's willing to let her go and live her life free of him. Then by film's end, the angry mob arrives at the lair, and he dies sitting at his organ, dying, it seems, of a broken heart. And while he did kill people and haunted the opera house, the mob goes from angry to somber to pay their respects. Apparently the test audiences at the time didn't like the villain of the film having redemption, and that he died peacefully, so they reshot the ending, and the director, Rupert Gillian, wasn't even brought back to direct the new climax. Which is a shame, because the original ending is far better and truer to the themes and the character of the novel and the Phantom. If only they had stuck to their guns back then. A real fucking shame. Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared TV pilot. Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared is a British surreal comedy horror series created by Becky Sloan, Joe Pelling, and Baker Terry, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Notably the web series that consisted of 6 episodes released from July 29th, 2011 to June 19th of 2016 on YouTube, with the TV series that was made after releasing on September 23rd, 2022. The series is a combination of puppetry, various forms of animation, both digital and traditional, that presents heavy topics like time, identity, expression, religion, the internet, etc., with heaps of symbolism and a tone that basically seems like a Sesame Street short if everything was slowly falling apart. At least that goes for the web series, as I've actually never watched the TV series that they made later. Anyway, the pilot for the TV series was only ever shown at a 2019 Sundance Film Festival and has never been seen since. This is for a few reasons, the first of which being the pilot takes place in the setting of Clay Hill and focused on current affairs, and it just didn't turn out how the creators wanted it. And by the time in 2024, when more people had wanted to see this pilot, the creators noted that they were no longer able to release it due to them no longer owning the rights to the pilot anymore. Though, despite this, 14 minutes of the 23-minute pilot have surfaced over the years, and it seems likely it will eventually be available for everyone to see in full at some point. Bonus entry, Cards of Death. And for our final entry this tier, we have a bonus entry about Cards of Death, a 1986 slasher film directed by actor W.G. Macmillan. It is seen by some as the holy grail of slasher films due to its rarity. Despite only being available in English, the film was only ever released on VHS exclusively in Japan. This was most likely due to the gore effects on the film being considered really in your face and quite over the top, and thus why the film never got a commercial release in the States at the time, while the Japanese market at the time was much more accustomed to this level of gore content, with the release of the Guinea Pig series at the time. The plot, according to the Lost Media Wiki, notes, quote, Cards of Death centers around a cult-like group in LA, spearheaded by a mysterious man known as Hog, that holds gatherings to gamble with their lives. The group, consisting of men in rubber masks and women in dominatrix gear, meet up and receive a random card from a tarot deck, and a poker-like game begins. The one holding the death card at the end is killed, with victims dying in a variety of graphic and sadistic ways, such as being crushed to death in a shrinking room. The person with a winning hand wins money, but must also kill the loser within 24 hours, lest they both be executed. Meanwhile, police are trying to solve the increasingly frequent murders. The film also contains elements of masochism, drug use, blood drinking, and mutilation, including a notable early scene in which a police officer's nose is sliced off. Unquote. While the film via physical copies is quite rare, on August 25th of 2015, an unknown person uploaded a rip of the film to Women in Prison Films, a website where a lot of exploitation stuff is uploaded, and is available for anyone to watch and download now. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen, for part 1 of the Lost Horror Media Iceberg. I hope you all enjoyed it and look forward to part 2, as well as look forward to the next part of the Channel Awesome retrospective, all about Linkara's videos that is finally getting very close to being done. Lots of good stuff coming up. And for those who are patrons or channel members, don't forget you're also getting exclusive or timed exclusive content. And the first one of these exclusive videos is available right now, that being a deep dive into the first infamous Jeff the Killer novella. And if you, of course, want to watch this video, then you can join from any of the $5 and up tiers on either YouTube or Patreon. With that being said, I also want to make sure to take this time to thank all of my loyal channel members and patrons for continuing to support the channel, and anyone else who decides to join, including all of my night eggs and my night owlets, as well as a very special thank you to all of my great night owls, including Bunzo, Bandan, Somber Devonte 06, Jeffrey Robery, and Hexmaniac Hannah, as well as a very super special thank you to all my arch owls, including the lovely Leanne Loves Christ, the amazing Ali Elman, the daring Daniel Petrie, the Super Saiyan Star Punch Gaming, the fearless Forgotten Ace, and the Supersonic Sword. Thank you all so very much, and until next time, this has been Dylan the Night Owl, flying off.